Thank you, Connie. Excellent segue, because Angela, I'd like to go to you next. And I'm actually going to read something that you wrote as you reflected on this particular Saigu. And what you said here is that Korean Americans have paid the price that all racial and ethnic minorities in the United States eventually must pay. You go on to say, Saigu commemorates those who sacrificed their lives so that the message of our permanence in this society can be delivered. And I found that to be so profound. What did you mean when you talked about the message of our permanence and having to sacrifice lives to be able to attain this?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's good to see everyone. And this month, every year, does raise the memory of 92 and many years after that, frankly. So when I think about the impact and the trauma that was visited upon small immigrant store owners here in Los Angeles, I can say that I spent probably 3 years visiting various parts of this country. If your identity was ethnic Korean, you were shaken by what you saw. I spent much of that time with faith-based organizations, with student organizations, with civic engagement organizers who heard the message that, yeah, we need to engage more fully in the society that we have come to, called the United States. And the impact was a deep, deep trauma and confusion. I used to also say that we live in parallel universes. So it's certainly in the case of the Korean community in Los Angeles at that time, I was an unusual bird because I was second generation, born and raised in Los Angeles. I, at the time, was in practice doing criminal defense work and very active with civil rights issues. And, you know, the fact of the beating was not news to the communities that I was connected to professionally. We knew that the kinds of things that were captured on that video that night were common, unfortunately. Back in those days, in order to settle a matter, you had to sign confidentiality terms, otherwise you would not get your settlement check. For the Korean community, they had no idea about this sort of thing because they were mostly first generation, as they are now. And they are reading the Korean news. And what are they reading? They're reading sort of the same thing, but not entirely. They are reading also about people being assaulted, burglarized, killed in their small businesses. And people have asked me, well, why were they in those communities? This was where they could go, right? And they didn't have any special programs. They brought a custom and practice that people started to learn about after 92. This is how they gathered their funds. They would create small groups of hopefully trusted people, and they would pool their money. And there's something called a K. Many of the folks perhaps listening tonight know about this. And the purpose back in Korea was, you know, you pool your resources so people could have weddings, people could do funerals, people could have celebrations of all kinds, and here start businesses. I mean, I was in court one day and I saw a Korean American lawyer being almost ridiculed by a bench officer because he was there on a breach of contract case. And the judge said, are you here telling me that you're trying to recover money in a situation where there's no written contract and you have no information about where this person has gone with the funds? And, you know, I couldn't believe what I was hearing because this lawyer was, I think, one of the pioneers of trying to introduce, you know, cultural practices that a place like Los Angeles needed to know. and has since learned. But you know, the impact on the small business owners who did survive was not just the loss, but they who had been paying premiums for commercial insurance found that their carriers were offshore. They couldn't recover on the claims that they were trying to make. Everyone already knows that there was no response to calls for help.
Right.
But these sorts of issues, being caught up in the gray market, the issues around suicide that followed, which didn't get covered in any media, you know, the issues of children having to give up their futures because they had to help their parents rebuild. All those people came through my office at one point or another, and it was truly dispiriting.